Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Martin Lowe from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And today he'll be telling us about a variety of topics, but one of them is the interplanetary superhighway for the development of the moon.
I forgot to send you a little bio. I'll just say that my training was actually in pure math, and I have a very famous advisor, Richard Hamilton, was my advisor. But back then, he wasn't famous, and in fact, that was the time when he thought about he came up with the idea of how to prove the Poincare conjecture, which eventually he helped prove in dimension 3. So my work was started originally in algebraic, no, not differential topology, but then my advisor gave me a problem an unsolved problem. I decided that was a very bad way to go. And so I was taking a class from Richard Hamilton on, back then he was working on the Nash-Moser inverse function theorem. So that was what I worked on and got my PhD. But then after that, that was also during a time when it was very, very hard to get uh, positions in universities. And so I decided to go to industry and ended up in the aerospace industry. And it was just by chance, a year or so later, I ended up at Hughes Aircraft Company. And then somehow, this was during the time of the Star Wars with Reagan, uh, a position opened up and they needed somebody to work on orbital mechanics for designing uh, space missions, orbits. And I was able to fill in that position, even though I knew nothing, of celestial mechanics back in those days. But I think the background in mathematics made it relatively easy to transition. And so eventually I ended up at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and because mainly I wanted to work on space missions um, uh, that was not military in nature, uh, and, uh, and I wanted to work on NASA missions, but Hughes Aircraft back then decided to stop, working in that area because they couldn't get missions and they were not making money. So that's how I ended up in JPL. Uh, but back then, though, all the work mainly has been in the two-body problem. But eventually, an opportunity came up where we were looking at a mission um, that required the so-called halo orbits. And that's how I started getting into the three-body problem. So uh, 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 and so the entire talk is all the things I'm going to talk about is going to be based on the three and the four body problems. So the four body comes in when we deal with a moon, because then sun, earth, moon, and spacecraft have to be involved. But one of the amazing things that I came across, completely by accident, as it were, is the realization that the invariant manifolds of the three-body problem of the various planets and moons uh, actually generate this vast network for transport throughout the solar system. And so these tubes are actually this image is a artist's conception of the superhighway of the invariant manifolds connecting one another. But in the real thing, we'll have a animation later that will show you that these manifolds are all spinning, around the planets, and so they're dynamic. So these connection, if this is just an instant in time when they're um, are visualized to be connected to one another. So with that, I'll just start going. So so the uh, the the talks I'll be giving is really the work of just an amazing number of colleagues. Uh, Starting, you can see people at Hughes, Goddard Space Flight Center, Barcelona, Purdue, and uh, all these. And then here's the grad students who did the real work. And then I've been also working with some undergrads. And fortunately, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, even though it's really it's really more like a typical aerospace engineering firm, and yet there's a lot of research that does go on, and then connection with Caltech really helps. Uh, and so I even have as you can see over here, one amazing high school student. So this Mr. Fortino is now a really important figure uh, in aeros not in the computer uh, in Silicon Valley. I think he works for NVIDIA as a beyond chief scientist, and I'm not quite sure what his position right now is. But anyways, so I just came across amazing people, and so here's the three-body problem. So I'm using just the Earth and the Moon as an example. Whoops. We always use the rotating frame, and then it's normalized coordinates so that the distance between the Earth and the Moon is 1, and the origin is the center of mass, and then in the rotating frame, then this x-axis is the Earth-Moon line, and uh, and then when you go into this rotating frame in the three-body problem, there are 5 equilibrium points, and they're named after Lagrange. But even though the collinear ones, L1, 2, and 3, were really discovered by Euler, and then L4 and F5, a little bit later, Lagrange discovered them. But the 1, 2, 3 are unstable, and then 4 and 5 have stability properties. They're not, they're technically not stable. Even in the case for Jupiter, I don't know if there's absolute proof that they are stable even today, but they are more stable than these guys. And so back then, in the 18th century, 19, without a computer, there's really very little you can do with the nonlinear effects of the unstable stuff. So everyone focused their attention on 4 and 5. And then in the early 20th century, they discovered that there were these asteroids in L4 and L5. So I believe these were called the Greeks, and these were the Trojans were here, and then the Greeks, because the Greeks were pursuing the Trojans. And so the differential equation itself is very, very simple, but this is deceptive, because even today, there's still just tons of work to be done, despite all the things that we've learned from it. And then this problem has really created some of the most important mathematics, including the algebraic topology, because when Poincare studied this in the late 19th century, he was the one who discovered the invariant manifolds around these periodic orbits. So he wanted to understand what these manifolds look like, and so he basically invented algebraic topology to analyze that. And one of the most famous problems for the last century or so was how do you characterize a sphere? So that became the Poincare conjecture. And then going back to our problem, in the rotating frame, there actually is still a integral. So this is the Hamiltonian system, and here's the constant, the so-called Jacobi integral or Jacobi constant. And so unfortunately in mathematics, we've decided to use the sign opposite that of energy. And so the Jacobi constant grows as things become less energetic. So for higher energy orbits, the Jacobi constant is small. And so the 3 bodies, I forget to mention, the third body is the spacecraft. So in this rotating frame, then everything's fixed, and the rotation rate is set to 1, so that the period of these guys would be 2 pi. And using those units, these normalized units, the parameter that changes is the mass parameter, which is the average of the the small mass over the sum of the two. So it's that's this parameter. Whoops, parameter. The parameter mu. Let's see. Right over here. Okay, the mu is the smaller mass, so in this case would be the moon. And then because it's normalized, then 1 minus mu is the larger mass. Okay, so for space missions, there are actually 5. Well, besides the 5 Lagrange points, there's the Lagrange points of the moon and the Earth. And so if you remember the picture from before, around the Earth with the moon, let's see, this is the Earth and the sun, but the moon is over here. So these are the Lagrange points of the moon that I call L for lunar L1, 2, and 3. But then there's also the Earth and the sun. And so the Earth and the sun has its 5 Lagrange points, but the ones of most interest to space missions are L1 and L2. And so L1 and L2, they're not symmetric in this particular model, and they're not the same distance, but they are approximately the same. And it's about 1.5 million kilometers. This is one. It's 1/100th of an astronomical unit of distance to the sun. So that gives you a sense. And then here's the moon. The moon's orbit is about 380,000 kilometer radius. And so it's got its own invariant, it's got its own Lagrange points. So the interaction of these 7 Lagrange points is what we are using for looking at space. But as you will see in this, in the talk, that these are also what controls the dynamics of the natural bodies, besides the planets themselves, really the asteroids and the comets. And so we're going to take a look at that very, very quickly.
And Martin, really quick, let me interrupt you.
Sure.
It sounds like there's some typing going on, although you're the only one unmuted. I don't know if you have any idea what that is, but
typing. I'm not typing.
Okay.
And there's nobody near me that's typing.
All right. I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt. It's
oh no, not at all.
No, not a problem. Yeah. Please, so please keep going.
Sure. So this was given to a general audience in the aerospace industry, so there was more explanation of things. And so why? So I'll explain how I came to discover this how the invariant manifolds are connected between the planets and moons. But the reason that that's important is that the natural dynamics of the entire solar system is governed by these manifolds. And but at the same time, it also provides really unusual structures for designing space missions, for putting space factories, if eventually we get to that point. But right now, it's where we would put spacecraft. The new space telescope is going to be put into one of these types of orbits, and then the transport can take using the dynamics. It uses very, very little fuel, and so that's why this got so much attention, because we can do missions that we couldn't otherwise, and I'll give you quite a few examples. But then for the astronomy, this controls the motion of small bodies, the asteroids, comets, but also dust particles, and and most important, I guess, for us is the near Earth objects, because they can actually impact the Earth and create havoc. That's what killed off the dinosaurs. So then the other thing is that the invariant manifolds create the morphology of the solar system. So things like the rings, the belts, the gaps. There's gaps in this asteroid belt. or the groups of all of these things are controlled by invariant manifolds, and so we're going to take a look at that. Now, I should mention that that there's a big difference between dynamical astronomers and people people like myself. So celestial mechanics is looking at millions and maybe even billions of years, whereas for people who are working in astrodynamics, the application of celestial mechanics to engineering, we're interested in things that happen, from hours, minutes to days, months, years. But years, a typical mission, interplanetary mission, if it doesn't go too far away, it's like 3 to 5 years. And then if it does go away, even with Pluto, it takes maybe 10 years to get there, but then the actual mission will last only a few years, at least the prime mission. So our time scale is much, much shorter. And then so it changes the perspective and things we can do with it. And I think some parts of the talk will give you, hopefully give you an impression on that. And I guess the main thing is that this discovery actually was done with an undergraduate at Caltech, Shane Ross, who now is very well known in the dynamical systems community. He's a professor at Virginia Tech. And so it was when I first learned about the invariant manifolds, the natural question was, gee, can you use this? No, the main part that was worked in application of invariant manifolds was looking at orbits around the Lagrange points of the Earth and the Moon. But people haven't really thought about going between planets. And so that was just the question I was wondering, gee, can you, go from Earth to Mars? And we found out that you actually could, but it takes a long, long time, like thousands of years at the very minimum to go from Earth to Mars. And so anyway, this was in Shane's freshman year. He started working with me. So the first year we spent, just teaching in differential equations, the two-body, three-body problem, and basically in the summer of his sophomore year, we started to be able to numerical. He learned enough with MATLAB that he was, we were able to integrate differential equations. And then I didn't really know how to compute invariant manifolds of the periodic orbits back then, but I did know that at the Lagrange points, why it's just you linearize and then you look at the eigenvectors, and so that's what we did. And when you integrate the eigenvectors, as simple as this it is, it actually is able to get you the most amazing picture of the solar system. And they really truly act like DNA strands, because you've got one for the stable, one for the unstable manifolds, and they just sort of sneak out from one planet to the next, and then just by examining this, we were able to explain how the resonances are connected between and there's the Jupiter family of comets typically go from the 3-2 to the 2-3 resonance, and this resonance hopping is intimately tied with the generated by the invariant manifolds of these periodic orbits. And so we're going to visualize this, and so that's how I came to the conclusion that this whole solar system is connected. And then for the next few years, working with other students, mostly undergrads, and then a few graduate students, we mapped out, what this looks like, and some amazing. Well, see, these were low-hanging fruits back then. People just hadn't really thought about looking at them. And so this is a cartoon I made, trying to explain that for the most part, the early part of space, we're looking at orbits around the Earth, maybe going to the Moon, and then we discovered that using resonant gravity assist you can go between the planets. But then there's really this whole layer of chaotic orbits that control the asteroids, and then there's this other layer of the invariant manifolds that go from planet to planet. So these are all related, but these are the yellow and orange colored layers are three-body effects, and then mostly when you're in the gravity well, these are the two-body effects. And so the interaction between these two is uh, is what makes I guess celestial mechanics so exciting. And the amazing thing is that, you know, in the two-body problem, it's completely integrable, and we know every solution. You know, all we have a very simple transcendental equation that gives you uh, all all the possible orbits, even though it took well, thousands of years, you know, for Kepler to come to this understanding. If you guys ever come to Pasadena, California, where JPL is, you've got to visit the Huntington Library. The Huntington estate is this giant, I think it's over 100 acres in the middle of just south of Pasadena in one of the wealthiest neighborhood, the home of the former home of the John Bircher Society, San Marino. And then in the library is a collection of the most beautiful manuscripts, you know, from perhaps the last 1,000 years, you know, including Kepler and Copernicus, uh, Arabic manuscripts from the 8th century. This entire room devoted to I guess to our intellectual history, and and so you've got to come and see that. It's just wonderful. Okay, so here is here is how I visualize the interplanetary superhighway, and Shane and I looked at this. So so we originally looked. So here's the in astronomical units, and then here's where Jupiter is, Saturn, oh gosh, uh, and all the way up to. So Pluto is up here. So it's really an anomaly. And back then there weren't as many known Kuiper belt objects, but today there be hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 objects that's been observed. But the black and the green, these curves, this is a Poincare section, Poincare map. Um, and then the variables I chose was a semi-major axis and orbital eccentricity. And the green and the black are the invariant manifolds of the, this is of the L1 Lagrange point, of the L2 Lagrange point. So these are basically computed from two trajectories. Uh, I didn't bother to compute the manifolds on that goes on the inside, but it turns out that they intersect to give you these heteroclinic connections. But anyway, so you can see from the Poincare map that they extend way out, way beyond, you know, the location of the planets, because the Copernican view of the, you know, heliocentric solar system, all the planets are separated from one another in their distinct, you know, elliptical paths, nearly circular. But but that gives you the wrong impression that the solar system is all the planets are isolated. But in fact, they reach out and they connect through these invisible manifolds. And so whenever there's connection, that means transport is possible. So if back in, so these are the known asteroids back then in blue, these blue dots, and the red circles are the known comets. And so you can see that the manifolds do act as separators. So they're separating so the asteroid belt, these are stable, but the comets are known to be unstable because you can't predict their orbits. And I'm going to show you this amazing, simple animation computed from invariant manifolds, how this happens. And it's one of the most, uh, uh, I don't know how to say this. It it was really surprising that we were able to solve this problem, and then to understand how this to be able to actually visualize this. And so so this is the point. So if you take this green curve of all these points, and then now you plot, just basically expand it. And when you expand it, the Poincare map looks and then change the coordinates to argument of perihelion, and this is semi-major axis. So now you see that these holes are created by tori, because basically the quasi-periodic orbits go around, and when they intersect the Poincare section, you get these holes. And so by looking at the holes, so this is where the stable orbits are. So asteroids would be trapped in these holes. So the 3-2 is a stable resonance. There's tons of them. I think the Hilda family of asteroids is in this here. But then if you look at the eccentricity, you change the coordinates of the same set of points. Semi-major axis versus eccentricity, you see that eccentricity keeps going up, like in the previous plot. And so so these Poincare section is created by two trajectories, basically. The stable and unstable manifold of the L1 Lagrange point. You just integrate this for, I don't know, millions of years. I think we probably did. So back then, this took days, several days to get this. Today, using the GPU, we're able to get this probably seconds. So we'll see that shortly. But anyway, so what this picture tells you is that starting from here, if you had an asteroid that started moving, following the invariant manifolds, so the dots are all the chaotic sea. What you don't see here is there actually are invariant manifolds connecting them from these resonant resonances. Let's see. So so it as it keeps going, eventually when it gets this far, because this is just a single trajectory, then it's actually crossing Mars. So when it crosses Mars, it will get knocked out. And so even though this is supposed to be stable, if you look in the 2-1 resonance, you're going to have a gap here. And so this is one way these gaps in the asteroid belt can happen. So here's Shane thought of this one. He was studying, taking a class in astronomy where they were talking about the zodiacal dust, and then he found that there was back then a paper that showed that there's structure in the zodiacal dust, and then we decided to. I decided to then plot this. This is still from the four. I guess there's from the invariant manifolds of L1 and L2, and just looking at how frequently they spend, the manifold spends in particular spots. How many and then by doing the statistic and counting, you get the structure of, if you had dust particles, what would they look like, and then they correspond very closely to what was actually observed. And this is just computing basically 4 trajectories. So we were still I still didn't know how to compute the invariant manifold periodic orbits, but when I finally did, so here's a blow up of the 3-body region. So the gray, it turns out that when the energy is low enough, there's a forbidden zone. So the forbidden zone, meaning that given this particular energy, particles can never move into this part. And so it actually creates a little bubble around the Earth. And so we're using the Sun Earth in this example. And then the L1s over here, L2, and then Lyapunov very early on discovered periodic orbits around L1 and L2. And so here are a couple of them. And so they're unstable periodic orbits, and the stable manifold trajectories is, I always use a cool color for stable manifolds and hot colors for unstable manifolds. And so the green trajectories all approach the periodic orbit, and the red trajectories fly away. And so this is sort of the starting point. And the manifolds keep going, but we stopped plotting them because there's going to be a mess. But so you can see that these manifolds are going to intersect. So when they intersect, you're going to have periodic orbits that connects to itself. And so these are the so-called homoclinic orbits. And it was the discovery of the homoclinic orbit that that uh, that created this famous incident for Poincaré. So I forget the year, but in the late 19th century, there was a celebration of the 60th birthday of the King of Sweden, and Mittag Leffler, the so I guess the only thing I know about him besides this story is his theorem, the Mittag-Leffler theorem in complex variables. Anyway, so he was in charge of uh, a celebration for the king by offering a mathematical prize for the best paper. And Poincaré wrote a paper on a three-body problem that won the prize. But very soon after receiving the prize and the journals already sent out, Poincaré discovered, oh shoot, let me stop that. Poincaré discovered that he made a big mistake, and that big mistake was the discovery of homoclinic orbits, that periodic orbits generating the manifolds, their manifold could intersect, and then you can actually get a trajectory that connects them. And so that actually creates chaos. And so this is how Poincaré discovered chaos, but at the same time, it ruined his paper. So so he reworked he corrected this mistake, and of course the paper was even more important than before, and so they decided that he would keep the prize. But then Mittag Leffler went out of his way to buy up every single copy that he could find of this journal, so that today there's I only know of one copy of this journal that remains, and it's in some institution in I think in Sweden, like in I believe it's some observatory, and in the basement there's a copy. And but anyway, so this is how chaos was discovered. And then the interesting thing about Mittag Leffler, he's the reason there is no Nobel Prize in mathematics, because he had an affair with Nobel's wife. And so that ended any possibility that's why there's no mathematics prize. Okay, so the transit here, so now we're getting to modern times. In the 60s, Charles Conley was working at the Marshall Space Flight Center, where he was studying uh, the three-body problem for orbits to the moon. And that's where he made all these discoveries about the three-body problem that we are using today for designing space missions. And so the manifolds, this is to show that they connect. So now you can see that from the red part you would leave, and then you would intersect the green part, then you'll connect you to the other periodic orbit at L2. So this then means that you can find periodic orbits connecting. Uh, they're not really periodic; they're asymptotic orbits connecting the periodic orbit. So this is the heteroclinic connections. But then when it goes out, you can also have homoclinic connections on the outside. And so this is really the picture of the interplanetary superhighway near 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 the near the orbit of the planet. But when you keep integrating these, they actually start going out, and they go to the next planet. And so this is when you intersect them, you get these uh, heteroclinic connections. So here's how you would do it. You do a Poincaré map over here, and then these tubes intersect, and then now you can take this point. When you integrate it, you get an orbit that connects the two. So the amazing thing is, when this intersects once, this is computing the Poincaré map. The first iteration, where But if you keep computing, there's going to be actually, once you have a single connection, there's going to be an infinite number of these connections. And so so this object gets very, very complicated. And so here's an application of this to uh, this is one of my favorite discoveries, that so when you do this computation, you get the heteroclinic connection before the magenta stuff, and then here's the homoclinic uh, trajectory. So it turns out that it's in the 3-2 resonance. So that means it goes around the sun 3 times while Jupiter goes around the sun twice. But then on the other side, the homoclinic orbit is in a 2-3 resonance. So it goes around Jupiter, the sun rather, twice when Jupiter goes around the sun 3 times. And so so this is a blow up of the of the middle, and here once again is the forbidden zone. So this shows that you've got this chain of homoclinic heteroclinic connection, and this is where the Conley-Moser theorem applies, and that says that once you have this, when you have a chain like this, that you have chaotic dynamics. And then here is an actual, the red is an actual path of the comet Oterma from 1910 to 1980. So it is actually following the paths, which is this we did not expect, and when this came out, it was just really, really exciting, and so here's the animation. So this is the comet in inertial coordinates, and so it does this surprising thing of when it flies by Jupiter, which is in this black, it gets when it encounters Jupiter, it makes this transition. So it's changing orbit from the orbit energy changes, because when it's outside the its semi-major axis is it's got a big radius, but when it's inside, it became tiny. So this change in the size of the orbit in the two-body problem means that it's changed energy. And of course, in the two-body problem, you can't do that. So you have to have the cooperation of Jupiter. But then this made it very difficult for astronomers in I guess in the 1817 to 1819th century. When you see a comet, you're not sure if you've already seen it before. So it's apparitions. And then by using the three-body problem and computing the Jacobi constant, you can then determine, whether or not it's the same comet. And so Tisserand did a very clever thing. He linearized the Jacobi constant, but he expressed it in terms of orbital elements. So it became very easy to estimate, to figure out whether or not a comet has been seen before. And so now the exciting thing is, this was in inertial coordinates. So now I'm going to plot it in rotating frames. So the green is the chain of heteroclinic and homoclinic orbits that I showed before. And so now you see the comet is following this chain. And so this comet definitely is in a chaotic orbit.
Ah, that's beautiful.
It is.
Martin, there's a question from Anant in the chat. Is the heteroclinic connection a periodic orbit of sorts?
It really isn't, because let's see, how do I go back? It has infinite period. It basically once it gets to the period, once it gets into the periodic orbit, it just winds around this forever. And so they're asymptotic orbits. So once you start here, you go there, you can't come back. Although there is, over here, I showed two heteroclinic connection, one going this way and one going the other way. So they appear as if they're periodic, but they're not, because it takes infinite time. So technically, they exist in theory, but they don't really exist in nature. The actual, but there's shadow trajectories nearby that exhibit the similar behavior. So from the Conley-Moser, then you get another amazing theorem, and that says once you have a chain of homoclinic heteroclinic cycles, then you can choose integers, well, positive integers, n1, n2, n3, n4, and n5. And then you can find, for this sequence of numbers, you can find a periodic orbit that goes around the sun n1 times, and then it goes around L1 n2 times, and then it goes around Jupiter n3 times, and then L2 n4 times, and finally it escapes through L2, then goes around the sun n5 times. And in fact,
and that's for any n1, n2, n3, n4, n5 giving chaos. Is that right? Or is it for specific n1?
no, it's there's a minimum, because in some cases it has to go around, Jupiter some of the planet at a minimum number of times, depending on the energy before
I
you.
see.
But any number above that, the base number, it's whatever you choose. And
That's so cool.
moreover, I know, and it's not just doing it once. You can go back and forth like this. And for any of these, you can you can generate this. You can find a periodic orbit. And so in the last few years, um, I've been working with a couple of students that we've discovered that the way you generate this is if you find periodic orbits, that goes around so many times, and then you can patch them together. And so we've been, one of my students came up with a terminology called patch periodic orbits. And so they're very easy to generate in that sense. And so that's the chaos. So here's in the Earth Sun system, the homoclinic heteroclinic connection. And then in particular, this black trajectory was a mission that I worked on that was launched in 2001 to the L1 Lagrange point to collect solar wind samples and then return them to Earth. But in order to return them, they had to it had to be in the daylight, because they were going to drop the sample capsule in a parachute, and then a helicopter was supposed to capture in midair. And so we've discovered that the only way to come back on the day side, because the sun's over here, is you have to use the heteroclinic connection to L2, and then you could land in. We had to land in Utah, in the Michael Army, the Utah Test and Training Range outside of Salt Lake City, and so this trajectory was the first mission to be designed completely using dynamical systems that was actually implemented. And then one of the amazing thing about this trajectory is that it's about three years total, and dynamically, after you launch, if you didn't make any mistakes at all, if everything was perfect, there was no maneuver needed for this entire mission to first go to the Lagrange point, get into this these periodic orbit called a halo orbit, and operate there for 2.5 years, and then automatically leave and come back to the Earth and land in Utah. So this is one of the amazing things about these chaotic orbits. And then I think I'm going to skip this, but just come to this other problem where around 2003 or so, they were thinking about the human exploration program that they would like to have astronauts, service some of the deep space missions like the Space Telescope, because the Space Telescope was then being serviced by the astronauts using the shuttle, since its orbit was around the Earth. But they were thinking for the next one, the James Webb Space Telescope, the second one, they're going to put it in the Lagrange point because it's a much better place for observing the deep space. But once it's there, it's 1.5 million kilometers. If you want to send astronauts to go fix it, it became very difficult because it's as hard as going to Mars, even though it's only 1.5 million kilometers away. And so, what to do? So I was asked to lead a group of uh, astrodynamicists to try to solve this problem. And I came up with the idea, well, uh, instead of for the astronauts to go all the way to, so here's the Earth and here's the Moon, to go all the way to the halo or the periodic orbit to service, you can also bring the spacecraft back using the invariant manifolds, uh, and then that would mean that you can do this near the Moon. And so we would put a station around the Moon's L1 or L2 Lagrange points. And in the example I gave, it was around the L1 Lagrange point, but currently now they decided to go to the L2 Lagrange point. Uh, but uh, uh, so this concept meant that you only have to put the astronauts, near the Moon, and so that we could do. Even 20 years ago, we could have done that. Well, we did that, almost 50 years ago. And so here's the little animation to show how you would do this. And there is voiceover. I hope you could hear it. Whoops.
Martin, we can't hear the voiceover if you want to narrate
Oh,
any, but that's okay.
I'm so
And
sorry.
no worries.
Uh,
And also you should try to wrap up in the next couple of minutes
right.
if that's okay.
Okay. So basically, the manifold of the Moon intersects with the invariant manifolds of the Sun-Earth system that allows us to either send something over to the orbit over here, the halo orbit, uh, or to bring the spacecraft back. So, whoops. Okay, let's see. Uh, I think I'm just going to end this part of the talk, and maybe let me just quickly get to. Uh, so I just want to show in this one that let's see, that the most famous comet, of course, is the Shoemaker-Levy 9, the one that impacted Jupiter, and so its trajectory is this blue thing, and you can see that it's following the stable manifold to uh, to enter Jupiter from this side. And then it's using the unstable manifold from the L2 to reach towards the L1. But then on the L1 side, it it's following the outside of the invariant manifold, but it doesn't go through the tube, and so it's bounced back, and then it then hits Jupiter. So its motion was controlled by these invariant manifolds, and this is just giving details of that. But it turns out that the Earth has these so-called mini-moons. They discovered that these asteroids can come in and get captured. And so in 2006, the first one was observed. And then so it's following the resonances on the outside of the Earth and using the stable manifold to come into the Earth. And then it's captured in this in the black trajectory for almost a year in a huge orbit, and then it escapes. Let's see, and then the escape trajectory uses the red, the invariant manifolds, and let's see, sorry. So once it gets outside, so it gets into another resonance. So then when it comes back, it can re-enter again, get captured. So this is how near Earth asteroids would come and approach the Earth, and they can actually impact the Earth. So for example, here you can see that it does get close and has multiple flybys of the Earth. So this shows that how they can be dangerous, but at the same time, it also means that we can capture them, and so so then the last thing I want to show you is let's see, is this the most recent work, and
just take a minute if you don't mind, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay. Yeah. So so this thing we actually we were having problems finding orbits that will land on Europa and
did you want to make it full screen?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. And so using the invariant the resonance plots that I shown before, we were able to show that by using the invariant manifolds, which is these red crossings, and the black dots are the actual resonant orbits that generated these this Poincare map. We actually use these unstable resonant orbits to do the gravity assist flybys. And so what we wanted to do was to find how you could find which of these resonant orbits can actually generate a unstable manifold that will reach and land on Europa. And so what we did was we start off where we wanted to land, which was the South Pole, and in this case, it's Enceladus, and we integrated backwards, and then created a Poincare map. And then the Poincare map showed that this 1314 resonant orbit, this is the one where it can land on the South Pole, because the problem was that they were having a very hard time finding landing trajectories. And so this approach solved the problem. And then we found out that if you looked at all the different resonances, this is showing where they can land. So the 5-6 resonance forms this big circle, and then the 6-7 is the inner circle, and then it keeps going until finally, at some point, you reach where things get very, very chaotic. And so now, instead of circles, they're generating these patches on the surface of. I think this is Enceladus, and so we actually filed a patent for this, and I can't quite believe it, but Caltech just approved a provisional patent for this, and I think I'll just end the talk here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Martin, for the wonderful talk and the beautiful images. Before we get to questions, please let's just unmute ourselves briefly and applaud for the speaker.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Questions for Martin?
I have a quick question, if that's okay. So I'm wondering if it's possible, or I mean, if things aren't too chaotic or hard to understand, that if you observe some trajectories along various orbits, can you infer the existence of extra, like bodies outside of the solar system, or things that you can't observe in the solar system that would explain, for example, trajectories using this this framework?
Well, people have use celestial mechanics to do this to do the inference, and that's usually with I think perturbation theory. I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know. Especially with chaotic orbits. Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that there are effects. For example, in Jupiter, the effects of Saturn on the invariant manifolds is very pronounced. So in those instances, I think you can. But that's a really interesting, well, if you are actually able to do particles and you can see that it follows certain patterns, perhaps you can, but it's not something I thought of.
I mean, yeah, I guess I see also if it's chaotic, it may not be very easy to do any kind of inference that way. Anyway, thank you. Interesting.
Well, let me address that. Just because you have chaos does not mean that you can't. It's just completely unpredictable. The fact that this chaos congregates. So all these orbits, in this plot over here with the the Poincare map with all the rings, these are all chaotic, and yet they form patterns. There's global patterns that they form, and so I think that there are things you could individual trajectories. You're right. It's impossible to do things with, but as a group, there are structures that they form, and so that I do think that you can use it, but you need to look at the global structures.
Further questions? Alkanan, I'm going to actually move you to a breakout room with our next speaker briefly. But so I had one last question, Martin. So
yes,
I was curious, this 3-2 resonance where they actually found the comet that was following that resonance. My impression is that the the mathematicians and scientists sort of knew that this 3-2 resonance existed before the comet was found. Is that correct? And how does it usually go with these things? Do you usually know to look where you're going to find these interesting mathematical phenomena in the planetary motions, or is it more you observe something and then you figure out the mathematics afterwards?
I think it probably goes both ways. The resonances, there's another famous Poincare theorem is that at each of the resonances, there's always two periodic orbits. There's a stable one, which makes all those holes, but then between the holes, there's always an unstable one. So the unstable one is what generates the chaos. And the unstable ones are what we actually use in mission design to do the flybys. But for years, I think people knew it was a three-body problem, but they may not have focused on the fact that these are unstable resonant orbits that we're using, and then we're actually not using the periodic orbit itself, but rather the invariant manifolds of the unstable periodic orbits. So nowadays, so what we do is we find these resonances in the two-body problem first, and then make sure that they actually exist in the three-body problem, and then we pick particular ones that have the right behavior and energy and performance, and to do the flybys and design. And so I'm hoping in the future, with the speed of GPU, that we can actually use directly compute the invariant manifolds to do this type of calculations.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for the very nice talk, and thanks for
Oh, sure.
everybody for joining.